Ladies and gentlemen, the Newton Nomadic Theater presents Story Slam.
So I'm 11 or 12 years old, and I'm sitting in my parents' den on Gordon Road in Waban, and I'm watching the TV. And my sister's off doing her homework. My brother, I don't know where he is. My parents aren't there. I don't know where they are. But I'm watching, and I'm mesmerized by the snow coming down on the TV screen. And as I continue to watch, I realize that it's actually not snow. It's actually the fallout from a nuclear war, or a depiction of a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. This was, as some of you might remember, an ABC miniseries called The Day After. Well, it scared me, and it made a huge impression. So fast forward then to high school, and I was taking chemistry, and chemistry did not work for me. It just, for some reason, I couldn't get it. And so back then, I think you were able to petition, and I petitioned to substitute Russian for chemistry, and they said, okay. So I was taking Russian instead of chemistry, and I was like, I'm still going to graduate. They said, yep, no problem. And, I had these visions of grandeur of possibly bringing together the Soviet Union and the people of the Soviet Union and of America, and helping everybody understand that we all don't want to kill each other. And so that was why I took the Russian language. I went on to college and got a degree in Soviet East European Studies. So I continued with this passion for Russian. And I graduate, and as Jerry said, I was really a lost soul. I mean, I didn't know what to do with a degree in Soviet East European Studies. So at the time, I applied to law school, I applied to business school, I applied to international relations schools. I was kind of lost. And at the end, I just said, you know what? I'm not going to do any of these schools. I have a choice in front of me, and one was I could either move home and live with my parents for a while to figure things out, or I could take some money that I had earned as an ice cream man in Newton the previous summer and go on a trip, a 30-day tour to Leningrad. Living with my parents, while it seemed really appealing, was not going to work. So I went to Leningrad, but prior to going, I said to myself, wouldn't it be cool if I could actually get a job there and stay? And so I networked with my parents' friends, and I was able to set up one interview in Moscow. So I get to Leningrad, and for those who have traveled, those first couple weeks when you're there, it's just amazing. The new culture, the people, the food. And for me, speaking the Russian language, or trying to, was just a terrific experience. 2 weeks in, I said to the tour guide, I'm just going to go to Moscow for a couple nights, I hope you don't mind, and I have an interview. And he looked at me, and I don't know if he was KGB or what, and he said, we just can't let you go anywhere. We have to be looking out for you. And he said, and he knew, he realized that there was no way he was stopping me. So he said, look, go to Moscow. I have some friends there. You can stay with them and make sure that you're checking in with them. So I take that overnight train from Leningrad to Moscow, and I get to Moscow. And this is in August of 1991. And I drop my stuff off at the apartment, and I go to this interview. And I'm nervous about the interview because I don't know if I'm going to have to be speaking in Russian or English or what. But this big man comes out. He's got rosy cheeks, and he's losing his hair, and he starts speaking English with a thick Boston accent, just like my dad's. And I'm like, oh, this is going to work great. So this was a guy from South Boston, actually, and he just wanted to talk to an American. So we got along very well. And during the interview, the way it was set up was I was sitting here, there was a desk here, and he was sitting right there, and there was a huge window behind him. And right outside the window was Leninsky Prospect, which is a huge thoroughfare going in and out of the center of Moscow. And there's traffic going left and right, and just so much traffic that it was hard not to notice. And then all of a sudden, as we're talking and he's interviewing me, like a spigot, there's no traffic anymore. And I look, and I'm like, what is going on? He can't see it. And then from the distance, I see these greenish vehicles coming slowly towards us. And as they get right in front of the building, I notice these are tanks, these are militia, these are all types of military vehicles with young men, 18, 19, 20, all with their guns. And I say to the interviewer, is this normal? He jumps to my side of the desk and says, absolutely not. I don't know what's going on here, but the interview's over. And I think back and I say, this could be, I learned in college that maybe because Gorbachev was a reformer and because he was underfunding the military, could it be the coup? Could it be a coup? I didn't know. So the interviewer says to me, "You go to the apartment and call me later." And I said, "Absolutely." And as I was saying that, I knew I was lying. So I go downstairs, I get a taxi. I do go to the apartment, but I go there to get my camera. And I tell the taxi driver, "Take me right to the center of Moscow." And he thinks I'm crazy, which I would have questioned at the time as well. I get down there, and it's just mayhem. And you see people all over the place with huddling together. Those that are pro-communist, typically those were the older people. Those that were younger, that were really looking for reform and really liked that this was that didn't want the coup to succeed. And as I was walking around, you'd see more tanks in the streets. There was a bus that was blocking a whole caravan of militia and tanks, right from blocking them from getting to the Kremlin. At one point, I did get caught up, and I was stuck behind a tank that was right in front of me, and a lot of different people, protesters, all behind me. I couldn't really move anywhere. But I used to be a gymnast, and I was a gymnast in high school, and the one thing I did notice was right in front of me in the tank were these rungs on the tank. And so I looked around, I knew I had my camera, and I climbed up onto the top of the tank. Now I get up there, and I'm shooting pictures furiously, because as I get up there, I notice I'm the only civilian on top of a tank. What I'm looking at this point are 3 rows of tanks, militia all over the place, cleaning their guns, going into the hatches, and one of them sees me. And as he sees me, he's pointing at me, and then I hear from the side some Russians screaming. I don't know what that's all about, but I look at them, and I notice they're screaming at me, and then I notice here, and the soldiers actually running towards me. And I noticed that also all of the other militia are actually going into their tanks. So I'm a little nervous at this point. Then suddenly, the tank I'm on jolts, and all the tanks start moving a little bit. And the exhaust comes up, and I'm wheezing from the exhaust. I get down on 4 knees, and I'm like, I got to get out of here. So I jump down, take another shot while I'm between the tanks and in between the exhaust, and then I crawl through people's legs and get onto some grass where my heart is beating out of my chest. But this was the beginning of my 3-year journey, and where everything from the militia and the KGB to the mafia was all part of the experience, and the whole experience was really a long way from home. Thank you.
In the late 1980s, I was in the United States Air Force in Germany. I had a guaranteed job as a software developer, and the first year I got there, I felt a long way from home. I didn't have any friends. It was a little bit foreign. I mean, I got an apartment that was out in this farmland area, and that was really nice, but there wasn't a lot to do, and when you don't know a lot of people at first, it was difficult. But eventually I found friends, and I even ended up with a boyfriend, and I got used to the fact that you had to stop, you had to relax after 1 o'clock on Saturday, 1 p.m., because everything closed down except the restaurants. If you needed to get coffee, groceries, any errands, it all shut down at 1. So it was kind of neat, because after 1, you'd rush to the walk plots at 8 o'clock in the morning, you'd do your shopping, and at 1 o'clock you're done, and then you would just have a good time, and all day Sunday for that. So it was Sunday. I was now with Max. The air show was happening, and we were going to go. Now, I have to tell you, I am not a spectator type person. And I don't like risks. I don't like doing things where I'm not in control, like taking a roller coaster or standing under fireworks. I mean, have you ever thought about, where does that stuff fall? And my hairdresser, who I was telling this story to, told me the other day that a piece of burning cardboard during fireworks actually fell on her, so go figure, it can happen. So anyway, but Max wanted to go to the show. He was all excited. Last year I didn't get to go. It was very sad. I can't go into that. That's another story. But we were going, and I decided that because of last year when he was volunteered to pick up cigarette butts and garbage for the 300,000 people that came to the air show, that this year we would volunteer for our respective squadrons to work at their concession stands. So we did, and we get there, and they were bragging about the great spot our concession stands were in. They were right at the front of the flight line where all the action was. And of course, this made me a little bit nervous, but they'd been doing this since 1950, so I figured, okay, they must know what they're doing as far as the placement of these things. And also, when I was underneath the tent, I didn't see what was going on, so I felt a little bit more safe if I couldn't see these planes flying by. But actually, I did go out and enjoyed these different shows from these pilots doing these fancy tricks from these different countries. The tent was nice because it was a very hot and muggy day, so it was nice to go back in and help out. So at about 3 o'clock, Max comes up to me and says, "You've been a good sport. It's been a long, hot day. Why don't we go? We don't need to stay for the last show." And I said, "Max, are you kidding? I mean, the last show, it's the Italians. It's the tricolori, the Frecce tricolori. We have to see this. You've raved about them. My God." And, during the other shows, he'd be running back and forth like a little boy, looking at the planes. "Look over there, look at that." So it was very cute. So I said, we're going to stay. So they were running late, so I went back in the tent to get a little shade, was helping people, and then all of a sudden I heard the announcer announce them. I run out looking for Max, run to his tent. He's not there. Run back to my tent. He's not there. Then I start... the planes take off, so I just start watching the show, and they go up in unison, 10 planes. You've got the white, the red, and the green smoke coming up, and the idea, their trick that I just vaguely know about is they're going to do this pierced heart, where they form a heart, and then the 10th airplane pierces the heart. So sure enough, they come up, all 10 of them, 4 of them break off this way to the left, 5 of them break off this way to the right. And you see this guy who has broken off away from the audience, coming now towards the audience. And I'm watching as they're completing this heart, and all of a sudden, I see this big orange, black, gray ball in the sky. And it took a couple of seconds to think, I don't think this is part of the show. So I frantically, as I could feel the heat and see this ball of fire coming down, turned and started running, and the crowd was frantic and people were tripping. Some guy tripped and I almost tripped over him, but he was okay, and I just kept going, and I just ran as far as I could get, because my God, I didn't know, how far this flying stuff. I mean, I just saw this ball, I looked back, and I could see this crowd of people and this ball of fire and flames and metal going into the crowd of like 500 people. So I just kept running because I just didn't know, if there were 10 planes, I had no idea how many had hit, and I kept on running until, finally people were just standing there calmly saying, "Have you been hurt? Why are you crying?" And I'm like, I just saw this ball of flames crash into a crowd, and somehow I found Max, and I was a wreck. There was no way. There were people there to help. I just said, let's just get out of the way. And we were trapped on base because it was just mayhem as far as the vehicles and figuring out what to do, and vehicles getting on and off. They wanted to let them on and off, so we just stayed there for another 3 hours. And while we were waiting, Manny Garcia came walking by. I don't know if that name sounds familiar, from the Obama Ferry Hope poster. He was the photographer who did that. Well, he also was a photographer at Ramstein, and I knew him very well. He actually says hi. And he was on a 30-foot tower. And you can see this on YouTube, which they didn't have back then, but I was looking at YouTube recently, and I just could not believe, you can see him there, and all this debris and the flames. He is so close, and one of the pieces of debris hit his camera, didn't hit him. he was not, it's amazing. You have to look at this. And eventually, we get home, all the telephone lines are tied up, it's really hard to get out. I finally call my mom, get through to my mom, and she was I said, Mom, don't worry, me and Max, we're fine. I was told I could go a little late. Okay. So she was laughing, saying, oh, I just didn't even give it a second thought because I knew that you would not be going to something like this. And I said, well, actually, I did go because Max wanted to go and I wanted to be open. And she's like, well, I'm sure you weren't anywhere near where it happened. I said, well, actually, we were right where it happened. And I didn't know till the next day when I went to work and found out from people who had gone back to help, who had the stomach for this, who I have great respect for, and Manny also helped out, that there was debris 10 feet away from our tent. So, after my mom found out how close it was, she quietly said, well, I'm glad that you're okay, honey. And I did feel a little bit far from home that day again, and I still don't like standing under fireworks. So, and I just want to this is actually a positive, happy thing, which I can pass it around, but I won't show everything. There were a couple of pictures that Manny got before he started helping people, and this guy was interviewed. This man and his wife and kid were standing very close to this, so when it happened, it's like an explosion and you just get blown off your feet, and they got blown off their feet, and he didn't know where his kid was, but then, he started looking, and all of a sudden, he sees the kid. The kid was stuck on concertina wire. I don't know if he's, you can see it here. You can actually, well, it's kind of hard maybe to find. Well, if you Google Manny's name, if you want to see him. Anyway, he's pulling him off the concertina wire in the flames, and then he, in the corner here, which this ended up on time, he's here as like a football player with his kid. And so they were okay. That family was okay. A lot of people weren't. 67 people died altogether, and then the 3 pilots, hundreds more were injured. But it's amazing. I was amazed that only, that few, considering. But anyway, it was an interesting experience. And I also don't like planes flying over.
My story starts actually, we are not a long way from home. When our kids were little, we would go to France for the summer and spend the whole summer there with the rest of my other family. So one year, we have to connect in New York. So we did our first leg of the trip, and we're actually in Newark waiting for the plane that's late. And it was a long time before 9/11. You had tables and foods, and people kind of talked to each other. And so we're sitting at a table with our 3 kids, another family is sitting at the table too, and we're talking, and they say something about a visa. And Joe and I, my husband, looked at each other and went, oops, we forgot about the visa. Well, our kids have French, so they have French passport. They don't need a visa. I have dual nationalities. I don't need a visa either. But Joe does. So this is a family trip, and Joe's got a limited time of vacation. He's got coverage for his patients, but he can't really say, oh, okay, I'll stay in Boston and come and see you next month. No. So what are we going to do? Then one of us has a bright idea and says, I know what we're going to do. Let's put all the French passports. The way it works is that one person would go up the line and go to the counter, and the guys would say, okay, where are you going? Oh, yeah, okay, next. So we decided to put the French passports on the top and Joe's on the bottom. And we had, at that time, we had a 15-year-old, big brown eyes, gorgeous. And so she comes to the counter, and so the guy starts going the first passport, second passport, third passport. So Joe goes, Simone, say something. So she says, excuse me, what's the movie on the flight tonight? Because in those days there was one movie and it was really important to know which one it was. So the guy says, I'm not sure. Let me check out. So he turns around, asks, gets the answer, and says to Simone, who's sitting there with her big eyes, it's gonna be whatever. Oh, she says, oh, great, I love that movie. He says, good. That's it. Here you go, you're done. So then we get on that TWA flight. We get to Paris. Well, in Paris, it's a little different. They are stickler for rules. And Joe and I go together, and they say, he doesn't have a visa. All right, sir, you come with me. Actually, they don't even say sir, they say, you come with me. And so I'm left with 3 kids. One of them is 15, the other one's 13, the other one is 9, 8 maybe. And we wait, and we wait. And we don't know where Joe is. We just wait. The kids start crying, and we wait. And then finally, one official comes to me and says, come. So the 3 kids come also, and he says, look, obviously, your husband should have had a visa, but you're a French citizen, and I could see you look like a nice family. Tell you what we'll do. We will let all of you go, but he has to go and register in not a consulate, not even that, just the main city, and say where he is and check in. So we look at each other and say, oh, yeah, sure, we'll do that, of course. What the official didn't know is that we were actually driving to the Alps. And then in the Alps, we were go to a tiny little village, and you have to go through this road that goes up and down and up and down and switch gear all the time as you go up. And then once there, we were going to meet one of my sisters, her kids, and we were going to do some hiking. But we were not in a touristy place. We're far away from any main city. And to go back, for Joe to go to a main city register, he would have to go down, take the whole road again, take a train and register. And we said, at this point, we are a long way from home. And we said, what could happen? What is he going to do? Chase us all the way up there on the trail? There's nobody, no official. You can't even step into Switzerland. You don't even know you're in Switzerland. There's nobody there. So we decided to leave things alone. And eventually, we made it all back. And we're all not a long way from home anymore.
I was a long way from home when I was in Bulgaria and in the restroom at a restaurant using a Turkish toilet in the open stall when a bevy of women and girls entered and showed just how little Bulgarian I knew.
Hi, I'm Jen Cole. I live in Upper Falls. I've lived here in Boston for coming on 20 years. And a couple of years after I moved up here, which was also a couple of years after college, my younger brother wangled himself some sort of several-month-long internship working for a publishing house in London. So my husband and I thought, well, he's over there. It's a really good excuse for a trip. Let's go visit him. We got the guidebook. We started looking at things we might want to do. I went on the internet, still in its younger stages, looked at hotel listings, tried to figure out what was central, where would be easy to get to various places. We'd never been. We didn't really know anything about London. So we just picked a place that looked affordable and, I don't know, centrally located, went ahead and made the reservation, and went on our trip. We took all of our paperwork with us, so everything was pretty easy on the way out. We flew into Heathrow and decided to take the underground into London. It's a long trip on the underground from Heathrow, so it was about an hour. We had to change trains in a couple of places. And when we got there, we got out our street map from our guidebook, hiked with our suitcases, found our little hotel, and found out that we couldn't check in for several hours. We had been on a plane for 6 hours and then on the train, and we were exhausted. But they did let us leave our suitcases so that we could go and then come back without having to carry all that weight. At this point, I was pretty stressed out. This is not something I had done a lot. It's still not something I've done a lot of, traveling in another city. After living in Boston for a few years, I still wasn't really equipped for navigating the underground and navigating a city the size of London. So I was tired and I was upset. And this is the part of the story that my husband insists that I have to tell because he's going to be watching the video and he wants to make sure everybody knows that as we're leaving the hotel, a pigeon pooped on my head. So I was already not in the best mood at this point. I was on the verge of losing it then. I said, I have to eat something. We've been on the road all this time. We're really far from home. I have to eat something. The only thing I could recognize where we were, because we're in a totally strange place, was a McDonald's. And so we went into a McDonald's and had some sort of hash brown thing, and it was not an auspicious start to the trip. And when we got back to the hotel, it got a little bit worse. They let us check in, and we went up to our room, and I don't know what had happened in that room before we got there. I was not able to identify the smell. I don't know if it was cleaning products or if it was something that cleaning products had not been able to address. It was a horrifying smell, and I thought at this point, I can't do this. I need to be back in Boston. We need to be somewhere else. I can't be here for a week, which was the length of time that we had scheduled the trip. But I rallied. We were a long way from home. I wasn't going anywhere. There wasn't anything else we could do. We opened all the windows as wide as we could and took off for our first sightseeing excursion. And we had a list in the book. We had all these things we were going to do in a short amount of time to do them. So we were very focused. We were very laser focused. We have to get to this place. How do we do that? What do we do with our passes? Where do we put them in? And how do we get there? And do we take a bus or do we walk? And boy, did we walk. We walked a lot. Our feet were hurting all the time. We took a day trip to Leeds. We took a day trip to Canterbury. We went and took the tour at the Tower of London. We did all of the touristy things day after day after day. And every night we would come back to this room and lay down and try to sleep and ignore the smell that was happening in there. And so by the end of the week, I was feeling pretty far from home. The night before we were to leave, we packed all our suitcases, we laid down. So, okay, we're ready to get home. We're ready. It's been a very interesting trip. We've really loved all the stuff that we've seen, but it's been long enough. And we went down the next morning pretty early, checked out, got our suitcases, got back on the tube, a couple of train changes, another hour, got to the airport, and we had a line to get through for security, and we had a line to get through for customs, and we had a line to get through for the gate. And somehow, well, we got to the end of all of these lines, and people had looked at various pieces of identification and tickets, and there had been paperwork. But it wasn't until we got to the end of the very last line so that we could get to the gate, so that we could sit down, and then the next thing that would happen would be the airplane. The man at the front of the line, which stretched very, very, very far back. We had been sitting on our suitcases for long stretches of it. It was so he said, your flight's not till tomorrow. At which point I did lose it. I really did. I burst into tears. I was at the end of my rope. We had been up early with our suitcases that morning. We'd been traveling already for a couple of hours, and there wasn't really anything for it. I mean, we could sit at Heathrow all day and spend the night, which did not seem appealing, or we could trek back on the tube, go back into London, go back to our hotel. They never asked us why we were checking out a day early. And nobody in any of the lines said we were flying the next day and not today. So we did. We made it all the way back into the city. We went back to our hotel. They didn't give us any trouble about staying the extra night that we had already been planning on staying. It was one of those things where you say, we're leaving on Tuesday the 9th, but Tuesday isn't the 9th. You know it's one day of the week. You know it's a weekday, but you've got the number and the day mixed up. That's what we had done. But we put our stuff back in that stinky room. And we were at loose ends. We had checked through all the stuff on our guidebook. We didn't have any plans. We just left the hotel and went walking, and we got to a cafe, and we had a beautiful little French breakfast at the cafe, and then we walked up and down the Thames, and we decided we would poke our heads in at the Globe and see things, and it was the best day of our trip. It was a bonus trip day. It had been such a bad trip. And then finally, it was over, and we went back the next day, back home. I try to think of that when stuff goes wrong. I try to think maybe this is going to be another bonus day that we didn't know we would have. So, thanks.
Buy my book. All right, now we've gotten the commercial part of the talk over. And actually, Far From Home is an interesting talk to me because I'm never far from home. I don't go on adventures like David. I mean, when I was dealing with bombs, it was the 50s, so you could watch the tests on the TV. And my approach was somewhat different from David's. I became a nuclear physicist because I figured if there are going to be nuclear bombs falling, I'd rather be a drop than a drop E. Okay, but then my life changed, my interests changed. I figured out I wasn't going to get a Nobel Prize. I went into finance and economics and statistics and all that stuff. And I ended up in Boston. And about 20 years ago, I was down on the Cape with my kids, and I decided I would write a book. Now, what kind of book? Well, I believe in airplane reading, trash, the kind of book you pick up at Hudson News, you read it on the plane, you finish it in the hotel room, when you leave the room, you throw it in the trash. All right, that's my kind of book, boy. And I read a lot of them, and I figured, well, where is, as Jerry said, all hell breaking loose? And the answer is the Middle East. So I started writing the book, and then I got fairly far into it, and then life intervened. I raised my children, I put them through college, I put them through medical school, and there's half a manuscript sort of sat there, but then, thank God, my business went in the toilet. And I'm sitting around, and I got nothing to do, and I said, well, the only way to maintain my sanity is to write. So I picked the manuscript up, and this is the horrible thing. Nothing had changed. It was exactly the same situation. I had to change a couple of names. Outside of that, boy, it's all the same. And I'm an equal opportunity son of a bitch. I hate everybody. So I really don't have, one set of heroes. It isn't evil Arabs and good Jews. It's evil Jews and evil Arabs. It's good stuff, Everybody's bad. But I want to talk a little bit about the process of writing a novel. And, I've written before. I wrote a classic textbook on the regulatory economics of title insurance, still available on Amazon. Make excellent stocking stuffers. It's a classic book, but it's not exactly a page-turner. Although I made my wife proofread it 4 times, poor soul. But when you think about the trash, right, that you pick up, what makes trash good trash? And the answer is it's not just plot. Jung said there are 5 stories. Boy gets girl, girl gets boy misses with girl misses with boy kills father. Those are sort of the 5 stories. So you really can't get a book out of one of those storylines. What makes it work is the detail. You think about the trash that you read, and don't deny you read it. Oh, yes, you do. What makes it good? You like it because it has detail. All right? Now, I'm not one for adventure. To me, adventure is throwing your life in the scales of chance and waiting for the pointer to stop. Not me, boy. I try and stay away from places where 100 million people are trying to kill me. This is my approach to the world. So I haven't traveled to the Middle East. On the other hand, that's where the action is. It's Willie Sutton, where is Rob Banks, where the money is. Same thing. We want to write a thriller and go where the thrills are, even if you don't personally aren't too big on the thrills. But I know that when I'm writing this book, I have got to get the details in. Now, the book takes place in New York, in Washington, in Israel, in Saudi Arabia, a little bit in Pakistan. Now, how do you handle that kind of problem if you aren't a world traveler? You solve it the easy way, the web. It turns out you can get all the detail you want on anything if you were the king of Google. You want pictures of the inside of the palace in Saudi Arabia? I got pictures. You want pictures of the Grand Mosque in Mecca? Also got pictures. Any kind of thing you want to get. Now, the only downside to this approach, it works quite well. I think it's a good book. But it works well because a lot of it has to do with the military. So I have spent a fair amount of time on the web getting specifications for anti-tank rockets, guided missiles, nuclear weapons. And I am convinced that one of these days, since the NSA obviously has all this stuff, the guys in black helmets with black Kevlar vests are going to be knocking on my door. I've told Sally, as soon as this happens, call my lawyer. Not that that'll do me much good in this situation. I will end up in, the bowels of something in the middle of Utah, the bottom of the NSA building. Well, they hit me with rubber hoses. But so far it hasn't happened. And I've taken a lot away from this experience, okay? I haven't been to these places, but I know them. I can smell them. I can see them. Which means that in my head, which at the end of the day is the only thing that really counts, to quote from Johnny Cash, I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere.
I was a long way from home when the housekeeper at our villa in Jamaica asked us if we wanted any ganja as part of our daily shopping list.
Well, at the moment, I'm not a very far away from home. I just left the rodeo in Woburn. However, 40 years ago, I was a very far away from home. We immigrated from not only a different time zone, but a different part of the hemisphere. We came from South Africa and landed in New York and came here to Boston. And then I realized how things, particularly what Winston Churchill said, are very true. He said, the Americans and British are one people separated only by a common language. And you don't realize how true this is until you're actually involved. So we arrive in America, Boston, for the first day, and you've got to go get to the garage to put petrol in your car. And when you get there, in those days, you had to check the oil. So you had to lift up the bonnet to make sure you could put your oil in the car. And then you check the back to make sure there's air in the spare tire. So you lifted up the trunk, the hood. I mean, the boot. I can't remember that. So you lifted up the boot to get the air in the tire. So this sort of thing goes on as you more and more. Sometimes it's funny, but in actual fact, sometimes it can be very confusing. For example, those people who are in parliamentary work, who go to meetings, if you table a motion here, it's the exact opposite as if you table a motion in the Westminster system, in the British system. So when you say, I'll table the motion, you don't know where you are. The other important point, of course, is that sometimes you can get X-rated situations, which can be rather embarrassing. For example, if you go to England, never use the word fanny pack. It's not what you think it is. And the other important part was my wife, who's a school teacher, was teaching middle school. And one of her pupils made a mistake. So she said, well, it's no problem, just take out your rubber. Okay, not realizing, of course, she should have said eraser. And this sort of thing goes on in terms of the situations. We arrived here one day. The next day we went for something to eat. And I think it was Friendly's at the time. And we ordered, and my little girl was 4 years old. And the waitress said to her, what would you like to drink? And she looked up to the waitress and said, do you people know Coca-Cola in this country? So we thought that would be a great advert for Coca-Cola. But what really happened and really brought home this whole issue was when we arrived, it was January, and we had never seen snow before. We came from South Africa, and snow never existed. And also the internet didn't exist. So when you saw snow, you saw it either on picture postcards or in the movies. And who was in snow were good-looking men and women with their sunglasses on top of a hill skiing down. That was snow. It was beautiful. It wasn't cold. It didn't make a mess. If you drove your car in it, you didn't hear zzz as the wheels spun. That wasn't snow. Snow was beautiful. So we were rather upset, to say the least, when we arrived here in the middle of January without coats in the middle of a snowstorm. And Logan Airport at the day was actually closed, and we had a big trouble getting from New York to Boston. When we arrived here, we moved into a motel which was on the border of Brighton and Brookline. The reason being is that my kids, the two girls who were 6 and 4, were going to Driscoll School in Brookline. So we had to be near there, and the apartment we were getting, the two-family house we were moving in, wasn't available for 4 weeks. So we had to stay in this motel called the Terrace Motel. Just to put in some sort of perspective, I subsequently found out that they gave hourly rates. So we're staying in a room which can't be much bigger than this area here. 3 kids, one of whom was in a cot or a crib, and the 2 girls were there and the 2 of us were there. And I went off to work. I was happy. What's the difference? I'm working. I deliver a baby Boston, deliver a baby in Johannesburg. Makes no difference, okay? Everybody's happy, except my poor wife with the kids was hardly happy. First of all, you drive the car on the other side of the road, which is not a major issue because it's a mirror image. The steering wheel's on the other side, unless you want to make the short turn. Well, the short turn here is the right, there it's the left. So suddenly you find yourself with cars coming at you. So you've got to be very careful when you're driving. Nevertheless, we're in this hotel room, and she calls the front desk, and she says, I need a globe. So she waits, and she waits, and she waits, and it doesn't come. So she calls again, and she says, I need a globe. So he said to Madam, I left it out the door. He said, what are you talking about? How can you leave the globe outside the door? It's dark. I cannot see what's going on. He said, oh, you mean a bulb? So needless to say, we opened up the door, and there was the Boston Globe standing there. So, as I said at the beginning, at that time, we were really far away from home.
I've taken a little bit of license with the theme, but I grew up in Syracuse, New York. I moved to Boston right out of college and stayed here, but I grew up in Syracuse with a very large extended family, and we spent a lot of time together with all my cousins and aunts and uncles growing up. And I always found living here that when I went back to Syracuse, I always said that I was going home. And the irony of that wasn't lost on me because I hated Syracuse. Yet I couldn't stop myself from saying I was going home. I hated Syracuse. I couldn't wait to get out of there. And despite getting married and buying a house in Newton and having kids, being an adult, I was going home. And that all changed about 10 years ago when my father died. He was sick for about 14 months, and I was going back and forth to Syracuse a lot, and I had been there for the few days before he died, and for his funeral, and for the Jewish mourning period of Shiva after he died, and it was time to come back to Newton, and I had to start my life again, and my kids had to get back to school, and it was time to come back to Newton, and it was really hard to leave. It was really hard to say goodbye to my mother and to say goodbye to my aunts, my father's sisters, and to get back in the car and come back to Newton. I felt like I was going to be a long way from home. It felt like I wasn't going home. It felt like I was leaving home, and it was tough. It was a really tough thing to do. But I did it. I got in the car and I drove back to Newton. And when we got back here, we decided to have a Shiva minion at my house in Newton. And I don't know, people know what that is, but a minion is it's a quorum of 10 Jewish adults who come together to pray, and they're needed for to say certain prayers, one of them being the mourner's Kaddish, which is a prayer that I wanted to say to honor my father's memory. And we decided to have that at my house to conclude the Shiva period. And I agonized over this, which I'm prone to do, and because we had just finished a renovation on our house, and the living room was empty. We hadn't moved the furniture back in. We hadn't hung anything on the walls yet. And the house just wasn't where I wanted it to be, to have people in it. And so, I just wasn't sure I wanted to do this. Plus, I didn't really want to call attention to my grief, and I wasn't great at asking for support, and I wasn't really comfortable with it. But people were asking how they could help, and it seemed like the appropriate thing to do. So we did it. My husband sent email and asked people to come, and we had the Shiva Minyan at my house, and people trickled in, and before I knew it, my house was packed with people. My living room was just filled with people, and my rabbi led the service, and we were I was just overwhelmed by, I was surrounded by all these people who were from all different walks of my life. There were people from my synagogue who I knew well and some who I didn't know very well, and there were people who I worked out with at the JCC and who, were sweated on the bike next to me and, spinning class, and the parents of my kids' friends, and, and friends I had picked up along the way, and people who, I had just built this network that I didn't realize that I had built, and that I was taking for granted. And I, as we sang the prayer Aleinu, which is a central prayer in Judaism that that anybody who's ever gone to Hebrew school knows. It's like the one prayer they're going to know. We sang it, and the sound just reverberated in the room because it was empty, and nothing on the walls and nothing on the floor, and it shook my soul. I mean, it's like I felt it so deeply, and I realized that I had built this community, and my husband and I had built this community here in Newton, and that I had built a home here in Newton, and I guess I had taken it for granted before and hadn't really realized it, and I was well into my 40s at this point, and I had never really appreciated it. And this was the first time I had, I really realized it, and so it was, this understanding that that I was home, and I was no longer far from home. I was home, and I don't think I have ever again referred to going to Syracuse as going home, and that's my story. So. And I urge you to buy my book about your home and mine, Newton.
So about 18 years ago, the phone rang one night, and it was our friend Zini. She was calling up, and she says, "How would you like to go to India?" And it turned out she had arranged for her to swap her little apartment in Manhattan for this big, sprawling apartment in New Delhi. So off we went, my wife and I and Zini, off to India. We'd never been. And it was wild. We got there. We spent a couple of weeks in New Delhi and traveling around there. And every day, like, you go out the door and you just see things and hear things and spectacles and smells, and just it was wild. Like everything you love in a foreign vacation. It was just amazing. So at the end of the 2 weeks, Zini wanted to go to a place called Varanasi, and I had never heard of it, but a friend of hers told her about it. So it's a couple hundred miles away. It's on the Ganges River. So we flew to this place. We get off the airport. We get a taxi, into the hotel in the city, and we pull out of the airport onto the big road. And like every big road in India, it's just mayhem. It's like cars and cows and kids and buses and tricycles. It's just everything. It's like mayhem. So we're driving down the road, and the cab driver starts being like giving us a tour guide thing, And he says, Varanasi is a very ancient city, many thousands years old. And when you die, you must come to Varanasi. You bring the dead body to the Ganges River. Everybody, they bring the dead body. And then all of a sudden he says, "Oh, dead body." And he points out the window, and this car going by has got this bundle on the roof. And you realize, oh my God, that's a dead body. It's wrapped up, but it's a corpse. A corpse is like tied onto the roof of somebody's car going by. And it's like 85, 90 degrees. It's the middle of the day, and there's somebody driving by with a corpse in the roof. And he continues and he says, if you're a Hindu, wherever you live, if you're 50 miles away, 100 miles away, you bring the dead body. No matter where, you must bring the dead body to the Ganges River to be burned. And, dead body. And he put, another one's going by, and there's the second, and it's like, there's a corpse. And I'm like, and I've just seen all these things in the last few weeks, but this kind of freaks me out. It's like, this is just like too much. So we get to the hotel, and we check in. It's this modest little, Indian hotel. And we check in, we go up to the room, and we get in the room, and all of a sudden something happens like totally out of character for me. My wife's got a great imagination. She can kind of go off on flights of fantasy sometimes. I'm an engineer. I tend to be very kind of grounded, but my brain just spun out of control. I get into this hotel, and I smell something. And it's like not a chemical smell, and it's not strong. It's not a really, but it's a very definite smell. It's kind of earthy, and it's not pleasant. And I don't. I mean, to this day, I don't know. But I get it in my head that what I'm smelling is a corpse, in the hotel. One of those cars. It could be in the next room. I'm smelling decomposing human flesh, and it's like I cannot stay here. I cannot stay. Zini and Mari are rolling around. Come, relax. I can barely smell it, and I was like, no, we got to move. So we move. We move to another hotel, and they're, he's getting crazy. So next morning we set the alarm very, very early. A friend of Zini said we had to do this, and we go to the river before dawn. We get down to the river. We find a guy with a boat. And ask him if he can take us out on the river as the sun rises over the Ganges. So we get in this boat, and the guy starts paddling. And as we're going off the shore, the sun's just coming up on the far side of the river. And you look back, and it's a sight I will never forget. Every morning at sunrise, the people of Varanasi come to the river to bathe. Hundreds of people pouring down the sides of the river, down the ghats, and wading into the water. And it's like, wow, this is pretty amazing. The guy starts paddling out. And then our boat guy becomes the tour guide. And he says, Varanasi is an ancient city. And he says, people come when they die, they bring the dead bodies to the Ganges. It's a holy river, and you must bring the dead body. Poor man, they burn the dead body in the factory. And he points, and on the shore, there's this big building, and you realize it's a crematorium. He said, rich man, rich man burn dead body in wood fire. And he points, and down the river there's 2 wood fires on the shore, big bonfires, and you realize those are funeral pyres. And one of them you can see like a bone sticking up out of it. And you go, wow, this is amazing. 3 people no burn dead body. Holy man, no burn. Little baby, no burn dead body. Mother was no burn body. Take dead body, wrapping it in cloth. Put rocks and then tie with ropes. Take the dead body to the middle of the Ganges. Boom, blub, 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 down to the bottom. 1 day, 2 day, the fish, they eat the rope. Then the body, 3 day, 4 day, the ropes, the body float to the top. The dead body go down the Ganges River. Holy river, no bacteria. So at this point, I'm thinking, this is the most bizarre, weird, crazy, insane thing I've ever. This is like places, I am a long, long, long way from home, and this is just nuts. But a couple of years later, I found myself in Ireland, and walking out my mother-in-law's front door, with her dead body in a box on my shoulder. And we walked out the door, and we walked down the city streets. And all of her neighbors came out their door to watch us carry that dead body past. And they all bowed their head the last time they would see. And then since then, my brother and my mother and my father, they've all died. And we took their dead bodies, and we filled them with chemicals to preserve them. And we put them in a beautiful box. And we invited all our friends and neighbors to come see the dead body for the last time before we buried them in the ground. And I guess when I realized, I didn't know at the time, but on that river that day, it was the first time I realized death is a weird and strange thing. And no matter where you go in the world, we get weird and bizarre and strange ways to deal with it. And the other thing I learned that day was a wonderful, beautifully blunt phrase I still use now. And I always say it with just a hint of an Indian accent. and that's dead body.
So it sounds like London is a bit of a theme tonight, and so I got inspired to put a London story in. My mother's English, and so I've been there many times. But that's okay. Ha! It was like the story haiku. I know I'm long-winded, but... And so my husband had never gone with me. We were thinking about having kids, and so I, in kind of a sulky way, said, well, we'll never travel after that. And so let's go. And I have a friend who has an apartment. So I got a free apartment, and I got keys, and I stuck them in my bag, and I got my passport and got my husband's passport, got on the plane, uneventful, got off the plane, got on the tube. And as we get on the tube, this is in the mid-'90s, and so still the IRA bomb situation was fresh in my mind. And, you know, the rule was always, if you saw a package, you should tell somebody and skedaddle. And so we get on the tube line into center London, and there I am looking on the bench next to me on the tube, and there's a package. And it says Harrods on it, and I thought, well, you know, that's kind of benign. But then I watched other British people kind of move away from the package and move to the next car, and I nudged my husband and I said, you know, I know this sounds paranoid, but that's a package, and, you know, we should probably get out of here. And so we have all of our bags, and we have all of our accoutrements for a 2-week vacation. And so we gather them up, and we have them on. My husband's quite large, so he's carrying the majority of them. We have the rolling bag, we have the shoulder bag, we have all the gifts for all the family members that we're going to... And he gets it on, and he looks like a beast of burden. And then we attempt to run down the cart, and it turns out that the doors are locked between the two cars, so you can't get out. So we have to wait until we get to a train platform and zip off the train, run down the train, run back in. And we're New Yorkers, so we are good at managing running down platforms. But we do this, and we sit down, and as I sit down, I look and I say, oh my God, I have left my purse back in the other cart. At which point, we have to make a plan to have me sit and watch all the bags, because there are about 8 bags, and my husband makes the plan to run back into the old car and grab my purse, and I'm supposed to stand watch in case anybody runs off the train with my purse, stealing my purse. And so we've got the plan. They very kindly tell you that it's, 6 more minutes to the next train station. And so we've got, a time down to a few seconds, and my husband's in the ready-to-go race position, and I'm guarding the bags while watching all of this and looking out onto the train platform. And he runs in to the former car, and there is a policeman who has completely ignored the Harrods bag and is taking photographs of my purse. And that is my story of being very far away from home.
In 1980, I was the young guy in the law offices of Thomas C. Troy. He was one of the biggest criminal lawyers in the city of Boston. He calls me in and he says, you got to go make a jail visit to see Butchie Foley at Walpole. Now, if you do criminal law, you take a lot of money from people. They're sitting in jail. It can take years to get to trial. They want to see you and find out what's going on. A guy like Tom Troy is not going to waste his time a half a day to go to jail. So the young guy in the office does the jail visits. So I had been to Charles Street and Dedham and Norfolk and Plymouth and Billerica, but I had never been to Walpole. Walpole was the state prison. It was where the most serious violators were. And Butchie was in cell block 10, which is where the most violent people in Massachusetts were kept. It was a notorious place. So Tom sat me down to tell me about Butchie's case and how he knew Butchie. Butchie was in Walpole because he walked up to a guy on K Street in South Boston and stabbed him and killed him. He thought the guy was messing around with his wife. Turns out he was wrong about that, but the guy was still dead. So he was serving life without parole. Once he got in Walpole, he assaulted 2 other guys, was convicted of them, got sentences on and after. And most horrifically, we were representing him now because he had stabbed and killed a guard in prison with a shiv. So I go out to Walpole, a big, scary stone building. I go through the front door, they go to the guard at the plexiglass. I tell him, my name's Mike Riley, I'm here to see Butchie Foley. I get a stare and a glare and hate. He passes some paperwork for me to fill out, and he points to some benches. I go sit at the benches. 45 minutes, nobody says anything. He knocks on the glass, he points me to a door. I go to the door, open the door, I'm in a little area. I get the most intrusive search I've ever had in my life. They then point me to another 10-foot steel door. The doors creak open, I walk in, the doors creak behind me. I'm in a trap, a prison trap, where there's another door 20 feet down the same way. Cement going up about 30 feet, guys with machine guns walking up and above. They let me sit there for about a half an hour, and then the door on the other side opens up. I walk through that, there's a guard. He points me down a long, long hall. I walk down there, I get to the end. Another guard points me downstairs. I go downstairs, now I'm outside of cell block 10. Another guard gives me a piece of paper. The piece of paper says, the Department of Corrections has advised you that it's inadvisable to make a attorney's visit in cell block 10. You've been advised that cell block 10 is not safe. You've been advised that the department cannot guarantee your safety, and you understand that if you are injured in cell block 10, the department will not be responsible. What are you going to do? So I sign it. Guy takes me to another door. Another big steel door opens up. I walk in. The door closes behind me. There's a guard there. He points me down the hall. And I realize I'm now in cell block 10. And I walk down the cell block, and there's cells on both sides, a couple of feet away. And people start yelling terrible things at me. I mean, horrible sexual things they want to do to me and to my mother and to my wife, and screaming and yelling and madness and just total chaos. I get to the end of the cell block. There's another guard. He opens another big steel door. I walk in. It shuts behind me, and I'm in a little small room with a table and 2 chairs. And I realize at this point, nobody has said a word to me. Nothing but glares the whole time. I sit in the room for about a half an hour, and all of a sudden I hear commotion, noise, banging, lots of noise. The door opens up. There's 2 guards. They have a guy, and they throw him into the cell. He bangs up against the wall, and he drops down to the ground. Now that was when I realized I was a long way from home. and I was very scared. So Butchie Foley stands up. He's a scary-looking guy. And he glares at me, and he says, "Who the fuck are you?" So I say, "Well, I'm Mike Riley. I work with Tom Troy. I'm here to talk." "Troy didn't tell me anything about you. I don't know who you are." I said, "Well, I'm Mike Riley." "How the hell do I know who you are?" So I reach in and I show him my bar card. He says, "I don't know what this is. This could be a scam. This could be a setup. How do I know you're from Tom Troy's office?" And he's kind of getting angry. I pause for a minute and I say, "Well, Tom told me that you told him that it was your cousin Willie who told you that that guy was messing around with your wife, and that you said if you ever got out of prison, you would find Willie and cut his balls off." And he stared at me and he said, "Okay, so what's going on with my case?" So we had a very pleasant 45-minute conversation. The end of the whole case, the whole conversation, I left. I never had the pleasure of visiting him again. He was convicted of the murder, had a second life without parole. He died in prison about 16 years later. And the only footnote I'll add, just to be a little mysterious about the whole thing, is obviously I've changed names as I told this story, but I will say this. If I hadn't changed names, and if you had followed the Whitey Bulger trial, you would recognize the name of Butchie Foley's cousin Willie.
I was a long way from home when I ate a frog tongue for dinner in China. That was a long way. And I was a long way from home when I poured my first glass of wine at 12 years old for a couple in a Costa Rican restaurant. The chef said I was too young to work with flames and stuff, but apparently not too young to administer alcohol in a public restaurant. And this is a simple one. I was a long way from home when I ran out of gas.
So when I stepped off the plane, I immediately knew I was a long way from home. It was like walking into a blast furnace. I was in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. It was my first time working overseas. I'd been hired by Saudi Tech Joint Venture, an American, Japanese, Saudi consortium that was designing the roads, railroads, and bridges in the Jubail industrial city, being built from the sand up along the Persian Gulf. My new boss, Mr. Peterman, picked me up, and we drove north, and it was about an hour and a half drive to get to Jubail. And there were some things that I saw along the trip that made me realize just how far away from home I was. Everywhere there were these flares burning off the natural gas from the oil wells, shooting flame way into the sky. And then there were herds of camels, wild camels that many of them seemed to like just staying in the middle of the highway. And most of all, there was sand, lots of sand. But we got to Jubail, and I started to get settled in. It was a fascinating project. There were people from all over the world working there. And the Saudi culture itself is quite interesting. And so things were going along fine. And after a couple months, my boss, Mr. Peterman, called me into his office and said that he was going to Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, in the center, to Saudi Tech's office, the Saudi partner, to ramp up their design office. And I was now going to be in charge of the Jubail site office. And this was fine. The only real problem was he took the air-conditioned car with him and left me with a broken down old Land Rover that had no windows, no air conditioning, and the four-wheel drive didn't work, so we always got stuck. But other than that, it was fine, and I was really enjoying this. It was really interesting. And after about 4 months, my visa was expiring, and I called Mr. Peterman up and said, I've got to go get a new visa, and I'm going back to New York, and I'm going to do that. And which I did. And I came back about maybe 10 days later to Jubail, and I called him and told him that I was back. And he seemed rather surprised, which I thought was odd. And he said, I'll call you back in a little while. And he did, and he said, Dr. Hamdan, the owner of Saudi Tech, wants you in his office here in Riyadh tomorrow. I said, what's going on? Just be here. I said, okay. And so I drove back down to Dhahran early the next morning, got on a plane, maybe an hour and a half flight to Riyadh, and presented myself to Dr. Hamdan, a rather imposing Saudi gentleman. He had his Tobe and Gutra official Saudi wear, and the first thing he said to me was, how did you get a visa? I said, I went to the visa guy in Queens like I did the first time and gave him the money and my passport and signed the form. We did not authorize this. We did not expect you to come back. We're taking over from the Americans, and you're not going back to Jubail. This came totally out of the blue. I was shocked. Then he said, we can, since you're back, we do have a position open inspecting paving here in Riyadh. We can only pay you half as much. And this did not sound so good, but I said, okay, I'll have to think about that. He said, well, I want you back here tomorrow morning, and you bring your passport and your return ticket. And I left, and I was totally in shock. And then I made a rather serious error. I was owed some money because I decided I was going to get out of there. And I called Jubail and spoke to my young Syrian assistant. We were paid out of the petty cash fund there, and told him what was going on. And I said, I'm coming, and I'm going to get my money, and I'm going to get out of here. A couple hours later, the guy I was staying with, another American who worked for Saudi Tech directly, came back and he said, you are in trouble, my friend. Dr. Hamdan is extremely annoyed with you. Your assistant told him that you're trying to embezzle the petty cash fund. Now, in Saudi Arabia, this is a place that I had seen things happen. I knew a couple people that got put in jail for very minor things, and we're in there quite a while. And so I was extremely upset and paranoid, to say the least. And I spoke with this other American guy. I said, I just got to get out of here. And the next morning, I flew back to the international airport in Dhahran, and I went to the Pan Am desk and showed him my open return ticket and said, I've got to get out of here. Sorry, the plane is full. And I mean, you don't understand. I really got to get out of here. And she said that Aramco, the Arabian American Oil Company, keeps a few seats. Maybe we can get you on and come back in a couple hours. So I kind of hid out in the airport, not knowing if people were looking for me now, because I hadn't shown up at the office, and got a boarding pass and managed to get through passport control, expecting anything to happen. And I was on the plane, even like in the movies, thinking the secret police were going to come get me. But nobody did. And after we were in the air about 15 minutes, the pilot said, we're now out of Saudi airspace. The drink service will begin. Cheers.
I hope you'll be patient with me. It's only the second time I've ever been to a story slam and my first time telling a story. But I was inspired by the theme tonight, so I just had to do it. So I'm going to tell a story about our family. My husband, Steve, who's over there sitting on one of the rugs, and I were married about 10 years ago, and as we were getting ready to get married, we talked about our vision for our family, and we decided that we really wanted to have 2 children. And so we got married. We had enjoyed married life for a couple of years, decided to go ahead and start having those children, and about 3 years after we got married, our daughter Anna was born, and she's just a wonderful little girl and just the joy of our lives. And so we were enjoying being parents, and when she was about 2, we decided, well, it's time to have that second child. And that didn't quite go according to plan. So we tried for a while to get pregnant, and it wasn't working. Went to the doctor, did fertility treatments, saw more needles in that time period than I really hope to ever see again in my life. And it just wasn't working out. So probably around 2012, 2013, we decided, our family is going to be a family of 3. Just isn't working out. But we still didn't feel like the family was complete. And so we kept feeling like something was missing. And right around this time, a long way from here, a little girl was being born in China. And her parents were unable to keep her. So she was abandoned and picked up and taken to an orphanage. So meanwhile, back in Newton, we were deciding that what we wanted to do was expand our family by adopting a child. We researched so much, we debated it, what kind of adoption did we really want to do this, and we finally decided that the thing for us was a domestic newborn adoption. We started doing the paperwork, we met with social workers, but somewhere along the way in that process, we began to feel like this really wasn't the right way for us. And right around then, our adoption agency started advertising, we have children in China who really need families. We're seeking families for children in these orphanages in China that we're partnering with. And said, maybe that's the route for us. So meanwhile, over in China, little Meng Chi had been taken to an orphanage, and she was being well cared for, well fed, and getting medical care, and they were taking good care of her, but it just wasn't the same as having a family. So she really needed a family. We really needed a child. And so finally, about not even a year ago, last fall, we saw this little girl's picture and decided that she was the right one for us. And it wasn't quite over yet. We still had a lot more paperwork to do. We had to wait for her files to be processed in China, for our files to be processed in the United States. Long process, but in the end, we just found out today that we received our final travel approval, and 5 weeks from now, we will be a long way from home in China, adopting our little girl.
All right, yeah!
I was a long way from home when bullets started flying through the window of the apartment where I was staying temporarily. Under a pool table, I was on the phone with my father, who heard the crashing glass and asked, "What's happening?" Ernie Birnbaum's wife is mad, I replied.
Just a little follow-on to that last story. 15 years ago, I myself went to China adopted my daughter, who's now 16 years old and doing fabulously. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. I want to talk about a hitchhiking story, because back in 1976, if you were young, 20 years old, and a guy, one of the things you might want to do on your bucket list was to travel cross country. Not in the family station wagon, all comfy and everything, usually in a crappy car or hitchhiking. And I managed to do both of those things in the same trip. My buddy had found an opportunity to have a job at Rolling Stone in San Francisco. So he was going out there, and I had managed to find a job working at a factory in Perry, Oklahoma. So our plan was he was going to drive me out to Perry, continue on to San Francisco, and then I was going to hitchhike out there at the end of the summer when I was loaded with cash, and then we would travel back across the country together and have a great time. So we started off in our crappy car, and the very first day, the car broke down right in the middle of Pennsylvania. I remember it was rainy as hell, walking up to these strange people's houses. They looked like people from the cast of Deliverance, the movie. It was a little bit frightening, I gotta say. But like a day later, we got the whole thing worked out. We continued on to Perry, and I worked there in this factory the whole summer. And that was like being in another world. I mean, it's a little bit boring, I gotta say, but the people were incredibly nice. And the people that I worked with in this factory, they took me under their wing, and they taught me how to chew tobacco and how to fish, and one guy taught me how to paint. And then I learned to mill using a milling machine and to weld. And of course, they asked me what the plan was for the rest of my summer. I said, well, I'm going to hitchhike out to San Francisco to meet my buddy. And they were like, you really think that's a good idea? Do you read the papers, man? Do you hear what happened? They're telling me all about these serial killers and stuff like that. And are you going to be armed or anything? And so eventually they convinced me to weld a little knife, you know. I made my own little knife. So towards the end of the summer, I get dropped off before sunrise on this lonely road out in the middle of Oklahoma. And I remember it vividly. It was dark, and I was the only person out there. And in the distance to the east, I could see clearly cloud-to-ground lightning. I couldn't hear it because it was so far away, but it was sort of foreshadowing things to come. And I began to realize maybe this was not the best idea I've ever come up with. But I was there, and so out goes the thumb, and very quickly I get a ride, and I'm like, okay, this is working out well. So it happens to be two guys who'd been out playing pool all night and drinking beer. Just the guys you want to be your chauffeur. So I get in the car, and about 20 minutes down the road, the heads start bobbing. And so my speech pattern started to go something like this. Can I tell you about my brother Bill? Their heads would pop up, and they would swerve back into the lane. My sister Deb! And then they would kind of, so eventually I got to the place where they could let me off, and so I was excited. I made the first leg. I don't know what happened to those guys. It was very kind of them to pick me up. So then by now it's daylight out. So I'm like, okay, this will be better. So I hitchhiking again, and this guy pulls over, and it's a middle-aged guy, and I get in. He's very kind of a little bit overly friendly, I might say. And we start talking. He says, hey, you want to see some pictures? I said, no, I don't know. He goes, take a look at these pictures. And he holds me this kind of tattered manila envelope. And so I felt obliged, to look at these pictures. And these were not pictures you want to see. And so he felt obliged to tell me his nickname, which was apparently Supercock. And he told me he could perform certain services for me, which I will paraphrase as a slow bob. He said he gave the best slow bobs. So I said, no, I don't want that, and could you please let me out over there? So I get out, and I'm in the middle of Oklahoma, and I'm roasting. Semis are flying by, and breathing exhaust. An hour later, I'm still in the same spot, and I'm going nowhere, and I've got to go all the way to California. My plan was to go to Oklahoma City and make a right. That was the extent of my plan. So I'm there, and finally a car pulls over, and I go running up to it. I'm all grateful, and open the door, and it's Super Cock again. And I said, Mr. Cock, do we really want to do this? And he call me Soup. So I said, you know, I don't know about this. He goes, I'll just drive you to a better place. So he actually did. He just drove me on to a better place, a little bit further down the road. And from then, it all went swimmingly. I got a ride from a guy who had a CB radio. Anybody remember CB radios back in the day? So he gets on there and he goes, is anybody going to California? I got a guy who's some idiot hitchhiking to California. Can you give him a ride? So at the next rest area, this guy picks me up, and he took me basically the rest of the way. And about in the middle of the night, he decided he was too tired to drive, so he let me drive his stick shift. I had never driven one, but we were in the middle of the Mojave Desert. What could possibly happen? So he got me up to speed, and off I went. And next thing we know, we got to LA. I went to Disneyland, which was one of my destinations. And then I had to decide whether I wanted to hitchhike up to San Francisco from there. And this is where the wisdom comes in. I said no. I do not want to do this again. And I took the plane up, and I saw my friend, and we had a great trip across country. Thank you for listening.
My story is kind of the opposite of that one. My boyfriend Robert at the time and I had been together for 4 years, and his mom was wondering when we were going to make it legal. And I wasn't ready yet. And so we decided instead to bicycle cross country. And many of our friends were like, oh, that's just a relationship test. And I'm like, no. I just want to bicycle cross country. And we flew our bikes out to Santa Barbara and then joined them and started biking from Santa Barbara down to San Diego and then kind of up and across through Colorado and then kind of due east from there. And before we had left Boston, my good friend Tim, who is originally from Missouri, or Missouri as he would say, warned me about what tornadoes are like. And he grew up in an area where they would actually have like tornado warnings and loud horns that would go off to let you know that it was time to take shelter. And he described the way the weather would change and how the clouds would look and when to become afraid. But I was fine, and we were having a great time, and we had stayed in so many different places. We were doing what's called loaded touring. We had sleeping bags and tents and a little camp stove with us, and we would stay in parks, and we were using these maps from Adventure Cycling, and they actually talked about people that would put you up for the night, or you could stay in different churchyards, and we even stayed in a health fitness center, which had free showers, which was a win. And so we were actually in southern Missouri, and we at this point we had kind of hooked up with this other guy, Ed, who was bicycling alone on the same route, and he was a lot fitter than we were, but it's still 3 is better than 1, so we were all having a good time, and our plan was to camp in this little town park, and we came biking into town around probably 3 in the afternoon, and it was beautiful out, and a police officer pulled up, and he said, "Hey, what y'all doing?" And we explained that we're bicycling cross country, and we were gonna, put our tents up in the park if that's okay. And he said, well, it's fine, but you should know that there's bad weather coming, and they're expecting, the possibility of tornadoes, and we might want to consider staying in the local hotel. That was enough for me. So I said, okay. And so the three of us continued to bike, and the hotel was on the other side of town. And we showered and got ready, and we were hungry. I asked, where is there a place to eat? And there really wasn't anything nearby. The only place to eat was a Papa Gino's, which was about a mile and a half down. And I didn't want to get back on my bike after biking all day. And so we decided to walk. And as we're walking, the weather changed, and the clouds changed. And Robert and Ed were like, this is amazing. This is so beautiful. Have you ever seen anything like this? And all I can hear is my friend Tim's voice saying, seek shelter. And I kept thinking, I am risking my life to eat at Papa Gino's. And not out of any desire, it just happened naturally. I started walking faster than they did. And it wasn't really all that long, I couldn't really even see them. They were so far behind. They were out for a stroll, and I was on a mission. And so I'm going, and it's dark out now. I mean, it is dark, and it's not nighttime. It's dark, and it's not, really, everything was like kicking in for reasons to be afraid. And a police cruiser pulls over, and he said, where are you headed? And I said, Papa Gino's. And he said, it's really not safe to be out right now. And I said, I know that! And he said, okay, get in, I'll give you a ride. And I said, well, my friends, Robert and Ed, they're back a little way. Can we get them too? And he said, you're almost at Papa Gino's. I'll bring you to Papa Gino's, and I'll go back and get them. And I'm like, okay. And so we're driving to Papa Gino's, and I'm in the back seat of a police cruiser. And he said, I hear my flashlight rolling around in the footwell. Can you pick it up for me? And I said, oh, sure. And so it's dark, and I can't see anything. And I reach down, and I see the silver flashlight, and I pick it up, and I said, oh my God, it's a gun. And he said, oh, it's my gun? I thought it was my flashlight. And he said, why don't you hand it to me? And there was this moment when I was like, wait a minute, he said he was a police officer, but do I know that to be true? And I'm holding his gun. What? And then all I could decide was, it's safer in his hands than mine. And so I reached over, and I handed it to him. I put it beside him on the seat. And he brought me to Papa Gino's, and he went and he got Robert, and he got Ed, and I couldn't talk. There really was nothing left in me. I think I pointed at the menu for what I wanted to eat. And Robert and Ed were like, what's going on? I can't, not now. But we survived. Thank you.
The Nomadic Storytellers. Thank you all for coming. We're going to sort of shut down until September. We won't be back here until September, but we're going to be doing an outdoor story slam at the Hyatt Center sometime on a Sunday night in the middle of the summer. Get on our mailing list over here, and we'll let you know. Thank you all for coming. And if you're not in a real big hurry to go out, just fold up a few chairs and throw them over on the side there. A little volunteering. It'll be great. Thank you.